Hello, and welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about a possibly anxiety-inducing topic, how to avoid exam disasters. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, the Catapult Conference, and the Trebuchet Legal Careers site. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you really enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today, we're back talking about exams, which unfortunately are coming up quickly for most of you. And today we're going to focus specifically on something no one likes to think about, coping with and avoiding exam disasters. Because unfortunately, sometimes not everything is going to go your way, and you might just have to make the best of the situation that you find yourself in. So we're going to talk specifically about before exams and then actually in the exam room. So let's start with before exams, because that's where most people probably are right now. What if you're just not ready for finals?
I think this happens a lot to both second semester, especially 1Ls or 2Ls, because you may...
Or 3Ls.
Or 3Ls, because you're bored to death by the time you're a 3L, isn't that the...
Yeah, your last semester, you're just like, whatever.
Exactly, especially if you have a job.
Yeah, just get me out of here.
Exactly. But it's so easy to get overconfident or get distracted by all the other stuff that you have going on. So you feel like you don't have to prep as much as you did the time before. I mean, oh my gosh, school years can get so busy with job interviews, advocacy competitions, resumes drops, extracurriculars. The stuff really adds up. And then all of a sudden, if you're in the second semester, it's April 1st and you're like, wait a second, my exams are in a month.
Or less. How did this happen?
How did this happen?
I mean, that definitely happened to me second semester as a 1L, because I spent the first month of the semester basically clinically depressed and not really going to class or doing any of the reading. And then I spent a month or so kind of, working through that and doing a bunch of therapy. And then, at some point I looked up and was like, oh my gosh, it is the end of March. It is spring in New York City. And I have not even begun to think about exams. I am so screwed right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really common. We know it's really common because we get emails from people.
We definitely know that it is. You're not alone if this is your situation.
You're not alone. And even if you have been studying diligently all semester, it is likely that you still feel like you're behind on something. You haven't done as many of the outlines as you've wanted to do, or you haven't done as much practice as you've wanted to do. But now is just such a good time to take stock and really kind of triage the work that you have left to avoid some serious exam disasters.
Yeah, and I think that's the message right here. Is you shouldn't be totally panicking. That's not really productive. Even if you're, say, a week before exams, even if you're a day before exams, you still have time to do something. Mm-hmm. But it's critically important that you figure out how you're going to best spend your time.
Yep.
So what if someone just hasn't even started outlining?
Well, this is one of those things where you really want to think about it from a triage perspective. You're not going to have time to go and write these amazing outlines from scratch with a couple weeks left in the semester, or even horrifyingly a couple days left in the semester. So now is a great time to, grab an old outline from the class and just update it and compare it to your notes to make sure that it, reflects what was covered in your class. You got to just make them your own, make sure you understand the material, but, use something that maybe has been proven to work for somebody else in that class, or you need to find a great supplement or commercial outline if that, aligns with what your professor covered in your class. But you might be able to make some attack plans or some condensed study materials, or Allison loved to make flowcharts. You may still have some time to make flowcharts, but, long 25 plus page outlines, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to start from scratch in a few days or even a week and, have the perfect outline for your class. But the good news is you don't really need that.
Right.
I mean, great if you've done it. Congratulations. You're ahead of the curve. But you can, sometimes it was actually quite ironic because some of the classes I ended up doing pretty well in were the ones I felt like I just didn't know anything. And it was that 2 to 3 day scramble of oh my gosh, I'm totally got major problems here. What am I going to do? and you grab a commercial outline, you grab an old outline from the class, you sit down with it, you think, okay, what are like the things I really need to know? Like, what are the key rules? I mean, I had open book exams, so there is easier because memorizing at this point is kind of a nightmare. But, if you have an open book exam, you make yourself a 2 to 3 page or, 1 to 2 page typically cheat sheet that you can have in front of you, identifies all the main issues. You make sure you understand what the triggering facts are. You do some practice exams. You go in and you hope for the best.
Exactly. I think the key is just to not throw the whole plan out the window and just panic and sit down and say, well, I give up.
Well, or also not to get like bogged down in trying to learn every detail.
Very good point.
Because if you start trying to learn every single detail of the first 20% of the semester and you don't get to 80% of it, you have a serious problem.
Very true.
If you get through 100% of the material with 70% of the coverage that you might ideally want to have, you're in a lot better position.
Exactly. And one of the ways that you can tell what you really need to study is by doing practice exams. And if you're one of those folks who hasn't been doing your outlines, it's probably also possible you haven't been doing practice. Or, or you've been working on your outlines all semester, but you still haven't been doing practice because it's so anxiety inducing.
Right. And this is actually what I would do when I was really in a bad spot. Sad to say, I've had more than one law school experience where I was really oh my gosh, I'm seriously in danger of failing this test a week before. It's amazing, though, what you can actually get done. So one of the things I would actually do is I would take all of the practice exams I could find. Some professors have 6, 8, 10 plus years of practice exams and literally deconstruct them. Mm-hmm. Sit down and read every one of them, make a notes of okay, especially if they have answers, these are the key issues, this is what they were testing on, and basically make a list and kind of look at it and be okay, in my Civ Pro class, for example, maybe 8 out of the last 10 years, they've tested the Erie Doctrine. I'm going to say if I'm going to study something, it probably may, that's one of the things I need to study. Mm-hmm. Then you look at it and you're you know what? They never actually once have tested class actions, for example.
Right.
You're are you taking a risk if you spend minimal time on that just to have the very basic? Sure, you're taking a risk, but I'd rather play the odds.
Exactly. And another thing I think people forget is if you do have a professor who gives you their own model answers, which I had a professor who did that for property in law school. I spent so much time studying those model answers and memorizing her rule statements and looking at the facts that triggered, the issues. I mean, a lot of these 1L classes, there are just only so many topic areas within a class that they can test.
Yeah,
in property, you're probably going to see adverse possession. You're probably going to see easements. You're probably going to see, a takings. There's just only so much.
Yeah, same thing as Civ Pros. If you're a Civ Pro professor and you're teaching a single semester 1L class, I can basically guarantee you it's going to cover personal jurisdiction.
Yep. Minimum contacts. If you don't know minimum contacts, you're in trouble.
Spend some serious time on that, relatively speaking. Yep. But, the details of some incredibly complex joinder thing that 5 people in the class are going to understand, not where you need to be spending your time.
Exactly. So you definitely want to carve out time to not only do these practice exams, but really study them. And I think something that a lot of people really refuse to do is rewrite them, use the same questions over and over again. You don't have to have a new practice exam. If your professor's only released 3 or 4 past exams,
just take them again.
Take them again until you write the perfect answer. It's not.
Yeah. And the other thing you can do too, if they've given you answers, which a lot of them do, is literally just sit there with a highlighter and highlight all the rule statements. And it's you don't know what the rules are in the class. Well, that probably just got you 70% of them right there.
Exactly. So even if you are feeling pretty good about yourself and you're listening to this exam podcast saying, I don't have any exam problems, guys. I am
I'm good to go. I've got time to listen to this podcast. It still makes sense to really go and, use these practice exams as a study tool because they really are where the magic happens. Absolutely. It's your professor is showing you what they're going to give you a good grade for. Why would you not pay attention?
Exactly. With both the practice exam exercises we're talking about, working on coming up with outlines, what's really critical, no matter how much time you have left, is to take out a calendar and really make a plan.
Absolutely.
Because I think that whether you have a few weeks left or a few days left, the worst thing you can do is get up in the morning and say, I wonder what I'm going to study today.
Yeah, what should I be working on today? You need to plan that out beforehand.
Exactly.
And part of the reason if you're doing it and making a real plan is you need to know if you're falling behind. Mm-hmm. If you've only got, say, 8 days and you're like, okay, I'm going to do a half day on each of these subjects and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to totally finish my outlines the morning of, next Wednesday. And you don't do that.
Yeah.
That's really good information for you to have about what you're going to have to, basically what you're going to have to triage on, because you got to cut something at that point.
Exactly. And when you're building this study schedule, make sure you're working backwards. I always tell students to, if you want to go old school, you can print out some blank calendars. And the first thing you want to do is write when your exams are, which some students aren't even 100% sure what day their exams are. And that's a mistake.
Triple check that.
Triple, double, triple, quadruple. Check that.
And in some cases, it's the case that the school screwed up the scheduling, and you may have too many exams in a certain period and stuff, and you may have to get one of them moved, or, say you're getting extra time and it takes longer. These are things you need to sort out well in advance so that you know where you need to be and when you need to be there.
Exactly. And then once you know that end date, then you can plan backwards based on the amount of time that you have. So if it's a few days, you need some detailed lists of things you're going to do in those few days. If it's a few weeks, you come up with kind of a high level plan, but you got to constantly checking in with yourself. So if you fall behind, you can't just say like, oh, well, I'm behind. You then need to readjust your schedule to accommodate for that. If you get the food poisoning and you're out of commission for 24 hours, well, then you've got to figure out how that work's going to get done. So you have to move it to other places.
Or if, you're supposed to be taking X number of practice exams and you haven't done any, that's sort of a problem.
Yep.
One of the things I used to use extensively during the exam period is something we've talked about many times, which is my favorite circles method. And the circles basically will link to the post, but you draw yourself a circle for every hour you're going to work, and you write in exactly what you're going to work on. And if you do 45 to 50 minutes straight, you get to color in the whole circle. So it can actually be very motivating. It's a good way to do those sort of like Pomodoro style chunks of focus for the better part of an hour, take 5 or 10 minutes, walk around, get some food, get some coffee, come back, focus again. If you're this far behind, you're going to have to do some serious intense work.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that means also that you need to be very focused. So this is a great time to turn off your internet, turn off your cell phone, keep your email turned off, turn off email notifications, No,
you should literally be in the back bowels of a library somewhere.
Exactly.
So no one can find you without your internet, literally basically going into seclusion, because otherwise you are not going to be able to get done what you need to get done if you're this far behind.
Yeah, exactly. There were people watching TV in the library during final exam period, and I can't even imagine. I don't know why you would spend their time doing that. So it just does not help you move yourself forward. If you're in trouble, it can be saved, but it takes a lot of focus and dedicated work to save it.
Yeah, it's basically, you need to get up, go to the library, do exactly what you plan to do, check in all day about how it's going, triage about what you need to do. You take time off basically to eat, to sleep, maybe to go to the gym once a day. That's pretty much it.
That's basically it. And you can go do fun stuff after exams are over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is not the time to be, going to holiday parties or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Luckily at this time of year, you have fewer of those to deal with, but Easter's already over. So hopefully you're good to go there.
Yeah. So what about people, though, who have to memorize? Because you were saying, when you're triaging and you have an open book exam, it's a little bit easier than when you have to memorize everything. This can be really challenging and stress-inducing. And, we have people come to us all the time asking about the fastest way to memorize. And it really does, come up with what has worked for you in the past. Of course, there are lots of different methods for memorization. I think the key from my perspective is to don't invest time in tools that do not work for you. So one of the things that I see happen when people are trying to triage is they're saying, oh my gosh, I have this closed book exam and everyone around me is making flashcards. I should spend time making flashcards. No, you should not, unless flashcards work for you. I hate flashcards. I've hated them since I was a little kid, and my mom would make me do flashcards for spelling tests and stuff like that. I've always hated them. They do not work for me. I have a bad relationship with them, but still,
tell me how you really feel about flashcards.
I know. I have a lot of passion about not using flashcards, but during the bar, I got sucked into this idea that I needed to make flashcards for the bar because everyone talked about their flashcards. It's a terrible idea. If it doesn't work for you, don't do it. But you do need to think about what does work for you. So if it's mnemonics, use your mnemonics. For me, it is handwriting rules and repetition. Handwriting has muscle memory that for a lot of us can help move things into longer term memory. So I would just handwrite out commonly tested rules that I were pretty sure was going to come up in the exam. So for instance, for a torts class, I could just sit down with a piece of paper and basically sketch the entire outline of a negligence answer, without any facts, because that's what I had to have in my head to go into the exam.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is it's not enough just to sort of like think that you understand stuff. I mean, This literally needs to be kind of recall, on the level of like, it's basically automatic.
Yeah.
And using some sort of technique to get there, whether it's making a mnemonic device, whether it's doing, sort of a chamber of a memory palace type thing where you physically walk through a room and kind of assign stuff in your head, that kind of thing. There's an interesting New York Times article on memory recently we can link to about that technique. But you've got to do, just thinking that like, oh, it's in my outline, I'll probably basically know it, is probably not going to get you there. So you need to do something that really like solidifies it in your brain.
Exactly. Or even worse is I'm just going to read my outline. I love people telling me that. Well, I'm going to memorize by just reading my outline. Well, there are very, very few people who can memorize that way. If you have a photographic memory, I think that works for you. But most of us can't just memorize by passively reading.
Yeah, totally.
That's not going to work. So evaluate what has worked for you in the past.
I mean, the whole premise of this discussion is you basically don't know this material.
Right.
Like you're not prepared.
Yeah.
And, that's sort of a joke, but it is true that, you can't memorize something you haven't learned.
It's very true.
So if you haven't gotten it if you haven't gotten some sort of like condensed outline or something where you have a volume of information you can realistically learn, that's step one before trying to memorize a 100-page outline.
Yeah. And this goes back to, studying those practice exams and things like that. You also need to evaluate what's the most important stuff to confidently have memorized and go from there. Again, spending time memorizing some nuanced language that may or may not be on the test is not the best use of your time. You go out to start with my example of the basics of a negligence question.
Yeah, if you can't tell me the basic of like, duty, breach, causation, harm, you're going to fail your torts class. I mean,
exactly. End of story. So that's why all of these things are very important, because it's about thinking about how you're spending your time, evaluating and making sure that what you're doing has the most impact. In a sense, the less time you have to prepare, the more, I guess, the smarter you have to study.
Right. And the more focused. And the reality is sometimes it can actually be helpful, because some of the problems people sometimes have on exams is that they know so much information that they can't really it's like too much stuff in their brain. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you come in really focused and like, okay, maybe you only know the rules that you're pretty sure are going to be on there. If you can spit those out confidently and do a good analysis, you're probably actually going to do okay.
Yeah, that's very true. So I think another thing we see happen before exams is life continues to happen. So there can be a death in your family, a close friend gets sick, you get sick, hopefully not seriously sick.
Someone wants to break up with you,
somebody wants to break up with you, or you want to break up with somebody else. I had a friend who had another friend pass away right around final exams. That was very horrible for them to deal with. And the key is, if it's something that's not serious, not really debilitatingly serious, you have to do your best to compartmentalize it and still remain focused as much as you can. That's really when turning off your phone until you have opportunities to check your phone is a very good idea, in order to not get totally distracted. But if extreme things are happening, like I mentioned, you lose somebody close to you or somebody gets sick, it's time to go to your school, to specifically go to your registrar and talk to them about what's happening, or the dean's office, because sometimes in extreme situations, they will either give you extensions on certain things, move an exam, extreme options like taking an incomplete and coming back and dealing with the class later. But it doesn't help you at all to not at least go learn what your options are.
Yeah. And this, it's not, stuff comes up. Like, people understand that, and there typically are processes in place to help you deal with this sort of thing. But it's important really to reach out, absolutely as soon as something happens, not to sit on it for a week or so thinking like, oh no, I can totally deal with this. And then the day before the exam, you decide you can't. If it's something major, I think it's definitely worth talking to whoever you need to talk to, again, just to find out what the options are.
Right.
And, if you end up deciding to take the exam or they force you to take the exam, at least then you have something to kind of fall back on where like, look, I told you that, this really serious thing happened and you forced me to take it anyway. Like I have documented that I asked to move it, whatever it is.
I will say that your first point of contact may be best to be like the dean's office and the registrar and not necessarily your professors, especially
definitely not go to the professor.
Yeah, especially if your school does blind grading, they have really strict rules about talking to your professors about things like this because they will then identify maybe who submitted the late exam or there could be some possibility.
Or sometimes like I know a lot of schools like after they do the blind grading, they get the list of who it is to kind of make those like in-class performance adjustments. So they're going to know who you are, that kind of thing.
So it's really best to go to the dean's office or the registrar first. And then if they tell you to go to your professor,
which they're probably not going to do.
They're probably not going to do, but then you can do
They're probably going to tell you exactly the opposite.
Right, exactly. But that's what, those student services are there for, and you should reach out to them. It's best not to suffer in silence. Learn what all your options are.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, this is for like a very serious situation. If it's something like I really just don't feel prepared, they're not going to be too sympathetic.
No, they're not. They're not going to give you an extension just because you were in Cabo on spring break and didn't do your outlines. Like that's not going to work
they're like,
out.
Your pet got sick or something. I mean, okay, that might be serious, but and also like people can get so like into dealing with these sort of situations rather than studying that you want to deal with that sort of thing as quickly as possible, like as professionally as possible. Just like, I need to know the options. What are the options? Okay, this is what I'm going to do. Move on, either study or don't, like whatever it is.
Yeah. I did have a friend whose cat got attacked the night before one of our exams.
God, that's awful.
Like, I mean, he's fine, but he was like bleeding from the neck. And so she's like running. She lived near like the main drag where the emergency vet was. So she's like wraps him up in a jacket and like runs to the emergency room, the vet emergency room. And like, and they're stitching him up and she knows she has this exam within like, a matter of hours. She comes home, the cat's all drugged up on pain meds and she's got like 4 hours to sleep before her CivPro final. But what are you going to do? I mean, like crazy stuff just happens, but she had some coffee and she got it together and she went and took her exam and her cat was fine, but stuff happens, I mean,
if nothing else, so like assuming things didn't go well on that test, at least when somebody in an interview says, so what happened at CivPro? She's got a good story.
She does. She has the bleeding cat story. I know.
And I mean, and ultimately, like, you've got to keep this in perspective. Like, these are just exams.
Yes.
Like, yes, they're important. Yes, you want to do as well as you can on them. But ultimately, if like something else serious happens that you need to deal with, you deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so should we move into the exam room and what happens when things start to go wrong there?
Well, let's give ourselves a panic attack, why don't we?
I know. I was like, do we need to do our breathing techniques that we talked about a few podcasts ago?
Breathing.
I know. So my favorite problem to talk about in the exam room is computer issues because I suffered from them a few times during my law school career. And I think this is something that people are fearful of, but they don't really spend time thinking about before exam time. And it is really important that you think about the fact that this could happen. Hopefully it will not happen. And it is not the end of the world, but you have to be ready to deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, like at a minimum, you need to show up with like pens and pencils.
Exactly.
Can write with. Because, I mean, my computer crashed, 5 times yesterday morning. So it's been fine today. But,
That's
if I was taking a law school exam, I'd be a little concerned at this point.
Right.
But, simple things here, like as we talked about before, you want to do your outline on paper for your answer. Because what if your computer crashes? Suddenly your outline is gone. You have to write the rest of the exam by hand. You're halfway through. You want to have that in front of you on paper. So worst case scenario, they hand you a stack of blue books and you start writing where you left off.
And that, I think, is the piece that's key, is that people at least need to understand what's going to happen if a computer crashes. Usually what happens is you raise your hand and you tell the proctor that your computer has crashed. And typically what they do is they may do one thing to try and fix it, or they might do nothing. And then they hand you a blue book. And your option is to basically keep writing. They can oftentimes, if you're midway through your exam, pull off auto-saved material that they can oftentimes compile together an exam, but you need to start writing. And what is key is that you just are able to like shut the computer, take a deep breath and do the best that you can. I remember the first time I had an exam issue. Luckily, I hadn't started writing yet. So it was actually just as I came back to my computer and started to like do a header, and I realized something was wrong and it was freezing. And, but I remember like getting the blue book and like looking down and having this moment. It was in civil procedure where I literally thought I could fail civil procedure. And I hated civil procedure. Like I'd never wanted to take that class ever again in my life. And I was like, I could actually fail. Like it was the first time in my life I really thought that I could not pass a class, because right now I was behind and I just had a blank blue book.
Yeah.
And so I just had that moment where I said, I refuse to fail civil procedure.
I will write something.
I will write something. And I ended up not doing that badly. And
well, that's the thing. It's actually surprising. I had a student last semester who told me her same thing, like her computer crashed before she started, and they handed her blue books, and she said it was an exam she did the best on.
Yeah. So, there is that ability to focus and just push through. But I think it is important to think about the fact that it can happen and make that decision. You are going to fight.
The other thing that can happen, which happened to me, is sometimes they'll sort of let you try once or twice to reboot, like you said. And sometimes that takes, 10 or 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And they'll actually give you time at the end of the exam. But what that means is everybody else is finished. You've still got 15 minutes. You're in the room with all these people who are packing up and cleaning up and, oh we're so happy we're done. They're all chattering away and you're still trying to write. So that's why you need, even if you don't normally wear earplugs, like I would recommend bringing earplugs for a situation like that, because like you have to focus the last 15 minutes when there are all of these distractions.
Yeah. So you just got to think about it and learn what your school's policies are on it. I don't know if they would have given me extra time. I don't think they did. I think it was just
this happened once. Like usually they would just sort of like reboot and keep going. But this was specifically in my Fed Courts class. Like it was something major. Like I don't know. It took a while. It was actually good because I realized while I was sitting there that I was completely off base on what I'd been writing.
Oh, that's kind of funny.
It was like a 1983 case or something. And like the person was or was not a state actor. And I like had totally missed that. So in the end, it actually helped me because I had to go back and be like, oh, let me put a not in front of all this. I mean, it was a terrible analysis. Of course, at that point, it was totally wrong. But luckily, that professor claims he didn't really read the exams, which I completely believe.
That's funny. But
I got an A and I did not deserve an A on that test.
Here's a good sanity check, though. If you're in Fed Courts and you don't know what we're talking about with 1983, it's time to triage.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you're taking Fed Courts...
If that's not ringing a bell...
Right. If you're taking Fed Courts, we're going to go ahead and give you a little secret. And a 1983 action's probably going to be on your test.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what about...
In fairness, this was my final semester of 3L year.
Yeah. So you were halfway out the door.
Exactly.
So what about being in the moment and realizing, like you were saying, that, you've screwed up something in the test, or it was one of my exams as it was happening, I really realized it was going poorly. You can just kind of see down the road.
You're like, this is not
going well. And again, I think this is one of those critical moments where you have to decide how you're going to handle it. Because I think there is the possibility that you can go down the anxiety rabbit hole and really get yourself into some really deep, deep stuff. And
that's what happened to me on the sort of like first sample exam we took, is like, I just blanked, and then I just kind of started writing, and it was just, I knew at the time, I'm like, this is not going well. Like, I didn't think it was going quite as badly as it actually went, and that I failed it, but like, I knew it was not going well.
Right.
And one of the things I actually learned from that experience was just for me personally, like, I was interested in your story just now about how you came back from the bathroom to a blank page.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I learned from that experience was that I should never, ever, ever do that.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I always started writing, and on each question, like, if I needed to go to the bathroom between like questions 2 and 3, I made sure I had something written so that when I came back, I didn't have that moment of like, oh my God, I'm facing the blank page. It was like, oh, I just need to pick up where I left off.
Yeah. And if you're wondering what Allison's talking about, that's because we do have notes that we share about this, and I haven't told that story yet. But you know that story, which is
I was talking about the one you just told about your computer crashing.
Oh, the computer crashing. I know. I don't even think I made it to the bathroom. I thought you were talking about my other time I went to the bathroom thinking I was going to fail my evidence exam. No, it's okay.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood the story. I thought you said you'd gone to the bathroom and you came back and you were going to start writing.
Oh, no, I did do that on my evidence exam, which I thought I was going to fail in the middle of the exam. That's my bathroom story. It's possible that we've shared these stories with each other quite a few times. But But during that exam, I really did think I was like, it was going down the tubes really quickly. And I went to the bathroom and I washed my face and I like looked in the mirror, and it was another time of me saying like, I might actually fail this class. I also hated evidence, never wanted to take it again. And had that pivotal moment of like, I have to go back and make the best of this bad situation. And then I went back and continued to work. I think at that point, I did have something written down on the page, but it can be hard for people who are panicking to come back to the blank page. It can be very anxiety inducing.
Yeah, and part of it, I mean, some of this is like if you have, say, a 3-question test and like maybe one of them you're like, okay, I'm really not doing so well. You kind of have a choice at that point, because some people will choose to spend all of their time focused on that question that's not going well. Or you can just be like, this is the time I have to work on this. I'll do the best I can. And then I'm moving on to hopefully something that's going to go better.
Exactly. We've also heard stories from students about forgetting a question, not seeing the last question on the test, realizing with a few minutes left that you've missed a section of the test. It's really important that you appreciate how many questions are on the exam. You count your exam pages to make sure you have everything in the exam packet.
Yeah, we recommend doing this up front in case there are any problems.
In case there are any problems.
Proctor, and at least, make sure you understand the instructions. If something seems weird, get that sorted out sooner rather than later.
Exactly. But what you don't want is because you just had like a brain not paying attention moment, that you didn't know there was a part of the test that you weren't taking. That's a huge problem.
And the other thing is, you want to calculate up front how much time you have for each question based on like point allocations or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And really pay attention to like, am I making progress through this exam? Because, there's nothing worse than spending 2.5 hours of a 3-hour test on the first 2 questions and then half an hour, 20 minutes or whatever on the last one. Like, that's just not going to go well.
Exactly. Now, something that also happens a lot around law schools is there's an issue with the exam. So the prof may have used a question that they've used before. So some people
happened
in the
room,
my
class
with
answers, had answers to the check, had like literally put the question and answers on a shared drive. And then gave the same question, and it was an open book exam, so half of the class had the answer.
Yeah. My school, it was a question that had only been released to the academic support department.
Oh, God.
So only a portion of the students had seen that question before, but the rest had not. And so some students was familiar with it, but of course, then the minute the exam got let out, people found out, and it was a lot of drama.
Oh, and mine, like, people realized in the test and were freaking out in the middle of it.
I'm sure that that's true too. I think I've also heard of, the professor tells you there are going to be 50 multiple choice, and then there are only 20 in the packet, and then it was like a screw up, but then you only get 20 questions, and people started freaking out about that in the exam room. I mean, I think it's really important to realize that, you have to alert the proctor, and then typically you have to keep working unless they tell you to stop. You can't.
Yeah, exactly. So you identify the problem, say, I think this is a problem. I'm just going to go as if it's not a problem. And then you do the best you can.
Yeah. And if there are really crazy things that happen, the dean's office will deal with it afterwards. But the best thing. In some cases,
another one at Columbia was like the professor that proctors gave the wrong test.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing. I mean, this stuff really does happen. But the thing, you just have to make the best of your exam period. I mean, like, there's just nothing you can do except try and say, I'm going to do the best with the situation I've been given, because that's typically the one shot you're going to get at that test.
Yeah, and you make your arguments later. It's like you don't want to be arguing with the proctor in the middle of the test. It's like heads down, get it done, and then you make your arguments later.
Yeah. What if you screw up a multiple choice Scantron?
Oh, God.
Oh, my gosh. That's also like really anxiety inducing. You just have to fix it as fast as possible. But I would make sure that if you're taking like a long Scantron test, I would recommend that you practice like long Scantron tests. And, if you're going to bubble as you go, if you're going to bubble in chunks, whatever your plan is, I would just make sure that you do that and check periodically throughout the Scantron that you are on point. So you don't get to 50 questions and then realize that you're reading question number 51, but you're on question number 50 on your Scantron, and that's a problem. But
and you can do things like circle the right answer in your book. So if you do have to go back at some, God forbid, you're not trying to like reconstruct your answers.
Exactly. But I mean, little things like that, you don't want that to be the reason why you don't perform well on an exam. Other crazy things can happen. I've known people who've felt like they had to throw up and end up in the bathroom throwing up during the exam. If it's a really extreme situation, you can tell a proctor, but you're probably just going to have to go back and keep working.
Yeah, like if you showed up to it, they're probably not going to let you out.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, maybe try your best, but
and people can be really distracting in the room. I had one, you're supposed to turn your cell phones off, and somebody's cell phone was going off during the exam, and the proctor was not paying attention. It was really annoying. But again, I can't blame my grade on somebody's cell phone going off.
I was like, you need to have earphones.
Yeah.
Or somebody's like really like twitchy and distracting, or like chewing, or sucking on ice, or whatever it is.
It is. It's like crazy stuff.
I mean, a lot of this goes too to like thinking about where you want to sit. Do you want to be in the very front row so you don't have distractions? Do you want to be like off to the side? All of these things are personal preference, but you probably shouldn't just show up and like sit randomly in a room for like every different exam. Like you probably should have a strategy here.
That's true. You were in the back, right?
I usually like to sit like off to the side, like in the back usually, so I could kind of like stare off into space a little bit.
I was off to the side at the front because I didn't like to have to climb over anyone if I wanted to get
to the bathroom. I took it like an airplane. Like I definitely wanted to be like on the side. Mm-hmm. I did not want to be like crawling over people.
Yeah. All right. I think those are most of the things that we've heard that have happened in the exam room.
Well, the other one, the biggie, is what if you think someone's cheating?
Oh, that's true. Cheating. That's a tough one. Unfortunately, I think it happens in law schools more than we would like to admit.
Yeah. And a lot of schools actually have an honor code where if you don't report someone that you think is cheating, like you're basically liable.
Yeah. That's
and again, I think it's, I mean, it's a tough call, but I think if you really have suspicions, you basically have to report that to a proctor.
I think you report it, but then you have to go back and again remain focused. I think it's very hard because you need to realize that they're not going to give you like a gold star for taking 10 minutes of your time to report it to a proctor.
You're not going to get extra points.
No. So when it all comes down to it, it is survival of you.
And I think I think this is the sort of thing where like you see something you don't want to see. It's not like you're sitting there like looking around, like checking everybody out. Like you should not be focused on what your classmates are doing. But this is literally like, you see someone with their cell phone, like with the answers or whatever.
Right. And, I would then, you get up, I would probably walk to the proctor. I would say something, probably go to the bathroom and then go back, like walk out of the room, come back, sit down, and just focus back on your own stuff. Because the reality is when it all comes down to it, it's still your grade and your exam period. And it is probably something that you don't want to see. You don't have time or energy to be looking at what other people are doing in the exam room, unless they're doing something annoying, like chewing ice.
Yeah, but even then it's like, well, you're not going to get in a fight with them right then.
Exactly. Or I had someone once sit next to me with like a really, really loud external keyboard, like one of those that was very clicky.
Yeah.
And we're all on laptops, and laptops create this kind of, like white noise.
Right.
But not a loud external keyboard.
Well,
yeah,
I don't know.
Do you remember taking the white noise that came from the laptops? I mean, there were thousands and thousands of laptops.
Like,
it was deafening.
I
know. It was intense. Somebody should record that and make a white noise machine out of it.
Oh, God, it would be so horrible.
I know.
All right, what about between exams? So, you've had all these crazy things happen. Your exam went badly. Your computer crashed. You think your best friend was cheating. Now you have to go study for the next one. What do you do? I
think that's really a challenge for some folks, especially with the examples we talked about, like the exam getting screwed up in some way. I remember when that happened in my class. I mean, people were lined up in the dean's office,
people were flipping
out. And the dean sent an email to our entire class basically saying, like, you have other exams. We'll figure it out. Go back to studying.
Oh God, I see. That's like, that was probably the right call. Columbia sent one basically being like, we've had this report of this thing happening, which like half the people didn't even know it happened. Like I didn't even know it happened. And we're thinking of ideas, including having you take the exam later again, and like listed all these crazy ideas. And so that was actually what made people flip out even more. Wow.
See,
in the end, they did nothing.
One more reason not to check your email while you're studying.
I'm sure you get these emails be like, I didn't even know about this, and now I'm like, wait, I have to like take this exam again?
Oh my gosh.
When? Like
Awful.
What? This is crazy.
Awful.
Not the way to handle if you're an administrator listening to this.
No. So the best thing you can do is just to compartmentalize. Once an exam's over, you have to make peace with it. It's done. It's done. I will tell you the night that I had my first computer crash problem. I think it was an evening exam, and I went home and I remember like taking the bottle of vodka out of the freezer and pouring myself like one nice vodka on the rocks because I had to start studying the next morning. There was no like multiple vodka on the rocks. It was like, and I just like turned on the TV and I was like, I'm going to be sad, like hour or two about this exam. And then I had to go to bed and get up the next morning and start studying. I had 3 days until my next exam.
Yeah, time, and that's all you can do. It's like, it's over at that point. You just have to be like, all right, that didn't go so well. Let's move on.
Let's move on.
Let's move on and triage for our next exam.
Exactly. And I think it's fitting that with that, we are out of time.
Woo!
Woo. If you have enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you're feeling a little anxious, make sure you do the breathing exercises that we talked about at our last, one of our last podcasts.
Test anxiety.
Test anxiety to kind of get in the right headspace. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.